they would try to line up these range lights so it looks like that one light is on top of the other. And when they see one light on top of the other, that indicates to them that they're in the center of the channel. Every time the channel makes a turn, there is a new set of range lights to guide these ships through. So you will see different sets of range lights all throughout the harbor today as we navigate around. Now off to our right, and this is going to be kind of difficult to see, but you can see a few little waves breaking out there off to our right. That is where the Charleston jetties are located at. There are two semi-submerged rock walls out there. The rock wall coming from the right off Moultrie Island is about 3 miles long, and then the rock wall coming from the left off Sullivans Island is about 4 miles long. And then there's a gap in the center for ships to come in and out of the harbor, which is where you see all those boats on the horizon. These are the Charleston jetties. Construction on the jetties began in 1898. It was completed by about 1901. They have made the harbor a lot more of a calmer and a safe place to navigate around, but as I mentioned, it has also changed our current and erosion patterns throughout the harbor today. Now, about 2 miles off to our right, that is where the Confederate submarine Hunley sank the USS Housatonic. This was the first time that a submarine was ever successfully used in warfare to sink another vessel. The Hunley was an 8-man sub. It had no mechanical means of power, so that means that 7 out of the 8 guys were turning a gigantic hand crank to spin the propeller, and then the 8th guy was steering the sub. So on February 17th of 1864, they went about 2 miles off to our right, planted an explosive device on the hull of the Housatonic, set that device off, and sank that vessel. But apparently the blast wave from doing that, or from blowing up that ship, also did some heavy damage to the Hunley, because no one ever really saw or heard from the Hunley again for almost 131 years. And it wasn't until famed author Clive Cussler started a search and recovery operation in the mid-1990s, and by the year 2000 they were successful in locating and raising the Hunley to the surface. And to this day, you can see the original Hunley submarine. It's located up in the Warren Losh Museum up in North Charleston, but that museum is only open on the weekends, Saturday and Sunday. And that's because during the rest of the week, they're trying to preserve and restore the Hunley in an oxygen-free tank. Now, obviously, you guys probably will not be able to make it to see the Hunley today, and you might not be around until next weekend. So if you did want to see what the Hunley looked like, there is an exact replica of the Hunley located in front of the Charleston Museum, which is on Meeting Street, right across from the Visitor Center, and that's a lot closer to the downtown area. And it's free to look at. It is just sitting out in front of the museum. So even while you're driving your car up and down Meeting Street, you can see that replica of the Hunley sitting out in front of the Charleston Museum. Alrighty, now off to our Alright, out in front of us and off to our right is our next lighthouse that we're going to talk about. This is the Sullivans Island Lighthouse, or sometimes you'll hear this referred to as the Charleston Light. This is the lighthouse that was built in 1962 to replace the Morris Island Lighthouse. It is an experimental design. It's triangular in shape, made entirely of metal. It's 165 feet tall. It is an automated lighthouse, and there is an elevator that goes all the way to the top to service that automated light. Now, when they first turned on the light for this lighthouse, it was extremely bright. It was visible for almost 70 miles in all directions, and the local residents over here at Sullivans Island thought that was a bit ridiculous, so they asked the Coast Guard if they would pretty please turn it down, and believe it or not, the Coast Guard actually listened to them and turned it down to 26 miles visibility, which went on to become the industry standard for all future coastal lighthouses. Alrighty folks, so the next thing we are going to talk about is this fort that's kind of just off to our right out in front of us here, and it's going to be coming down our right side as I keep turning back into the harbor here. This is what used to be known as Fort Sullivan, but today this is known as Fort Moultrie. This is where you see the flag flying over there in the earthen mounds. So this was renamed after a Commander Moultrie who had a very unlikely but successful defense of this fort back on June 28th of 1776. So what happened on that day is a British fleet commander named Sir Peter Parker, who had no relation to Spider-Man, came sailing into our harbor and began attacking this tiny fort off to our right. Now at that time this fort was just made out of palmetto logs and sand, so after this British fleet commander fired at the fort for a few hours, he stopped to see if they wanted to surrender, but instead all he heard was laughter coming from the fort. And that's because it turns out that cannonballs will bounce off of palmetto logs. So in one of the first documented cases of recycling, our guys were going out there, grabbing those British cannonballs, dusting them off, loading them in our own cannons, and then firing them right back at the British. And that upset the British commander greatly, so he sailed his ships in even closer, and then they got caught up on sandbars over here, making them stationary targets. And then Commander Moultrie was able to lock his cannons on targets that were no longer moving, and he blew the heck out of that British fleet. He was able to sink 5 out of the 9 ships, and he did heavy damage to the other 4. And the other 4 were only able to retreat once high tide came in. And this was cause for great celebration here in the South. Here we were, a bunch of rednecks in a fort made out of palmetto logs and sand. and we just won a battle against the largest navy in the world. So to this day, June 28th is still celebrated as Carolina Day here in the South to commemorate the unlikely but successful defense of what is now Fort Moultrie on June 28th of 1776, 1 week prior to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And it's also why you see the palmetto tree on our state flag. And that is from the palmetto logs are able to successfully defend that fort. All right, guys, so off to our right over here is Sullivans Island. This is one of the more expensive zip codes pretty much anywhere in the country. This is where a lot of our rich and famous live. I know Reese Witherspoon's got a house over there somewhere. Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s also got a house there. Stephen Colbert's got a house in Sullivans Island. Bill Murray used to have a house over there in Sullivans Island, but Bill Murray couldn't behave himself, so now his ex-wife has a house in Sullivans Island, and Bill Murray was forced to move over to Mount Pleasant. But Bill Murray is a fixture in our local neighborhood. He owns part of our minor league baseball team and also a few area restaurants. And he has been known to have a few too many adult cocktails and then photobomb people. So don't be surprised if Bill Murray somehow ends up in the background of one of your pictures once you leave the Charleston area. Now the next thing we're talking about is this house all the way in the end of Sullivans Island here. You can see it's sitting out on this point kind of by itself. This is owned by one of our local billionaires. His name is Ben Navarro. I know he was in the bidding for the Carolina Panthers a few years ago when they came up for sale. So to build that house, they had to knock down the 2 existing structures that were over there. And then he wanted to extend that point of land out about 20 or 30 yards. He was required to build a custom seawall all the way around that point to hold the land in place. And we understand that seawall cost him about $5 million alone. We know the windows in that house are worth about $2 million, and that's because he wanted custom cut windows from Venice, Italy. But we did hear from a local contractor friend of ours that after our first tropical storm, a lot of those windows ended up leaking and had to be replaced with Pella and Anderson windows. So it does go to show you don't always have to drop big coin on expensive windows from Venice, Italy, especially if you want them to be hurricane proof. Now off to the left of that house, the next piece of land that we're looking at, this is kind of where you see the water towers over the far tree line about 10 o'clock off the right side of the boat. And you can see a lot of those blue cranes from the Wanda Welsh Container Terminal. Those are those blue things sticking up over the tree line over there. That is the town of Mount Pleasant. And Mount Pleasant is named after a plantation and a series of homes that was built around the Shem Creek area. And this plantation was owned by Rebecca and Joseph Mott. And Rebecca Mott is famous for 2 things. The first thing she's famous for is that she gave birth to 19 children on that plantation and somehow still had the courage to call it Mount Pleasant. And the second thing she is famous for is that she is one of our earliest female Revolutionary War heroes. Back in 1780, when the British were occupying this whole area, Rebecca found out that they were using one of the homes on her plantation as a command center. So she snuck over there in the middle of the night while pregnant and set fire to one of her own homes in order to get the British out, making her one of our earliest female Revolutionary War heroes. All right, guys, so we've got about 10 minutes till our next point of interest, so I'm going to take a little break from the microphone here. Now's a good time to get up, stretch your legs, maybe grab another cocktail from the Bell Cafe area. The girl that took your boarding photos will be around to show you those photos during this break. If she doesn't make it to you during this break, those photos will be available on the dock after the trip. But otherwise, I'm going to put on some music, and I'll be back with you in about 10 minutes or so once we reach our next point of interest.